Hello, everyone. I'm David. I'm Ti, and I'm here today to talk about Paul Bennewitz. This is a documented story from a non-believers of somebody they targeted. And they used him up. He was looking for signals in the air and all that. He saw weird light in the sky and all that. So these people, I'm just going to read you the story. But first, my God, somebody asked me in a comment, why does God allow this? I don't know. Why did God allow Job to go through what he went through? And then in Job 42:10, when Job prayed for his friends, Job got back double. And Job suffered everything, every kind of thing you can think of. Job suffered and remained faithful. So that's what I'm going to do is take my chance and remain faithful during suffering. Um, you know, suffering is not good at all, but we need to turn it into positive. It can lead to growth in character, a deeper relationship with God, greater appreciation for blessings we do have, stuff like that. Um, for instance, I find myself, eating a meal and being so thankful for it, whereas to some people who hadn't been through what I've been through don't think about nothing like that when they eat a meal. They don't think about that at all. They take it for granted. Um, but God's with us even when we suffer. And It says in Romans 5:3-5, it says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. Um, so anyway, and Jesus said we must take up our cross and follow him. So that means go through what he went through. Didn't say it was going to be easy. Matter of fact, most of the disciples and apostles of Jesus died pretty bad death. So anyway, that's my take on the suffering thing. I don't know. I was mad at God for years for it. I was bitter at God. And then one day I said, you know what? I can't be bitter at God for this. Um, the prince power of this world is Satan. And we're in this world, but not of it. It's what the Bible says. So if we're in the world is Satan's world. We're just in it, but we're not supposed to be of it. That means be spiritually minded in all things. So anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling, and get to the story I got to share with you. It's evidence from the '60s, real evidence, documented evidence that this TI program's real, and there's a TI from the '60s. Um, Here we go. Okay. I'm going to start backward. I'm going to start the elements of the story that Paul Bennett was a target individual. Then I'm going to go up and read an interview about what happened. According to U.S. Air Force agent Richard C. Doty, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, who was assigned to be Paul Bennewitz's his handler, Bennewitz's activities threatened to expose a number of U.S. Air Force black projects at the Kirkland Air Force Base near Albuquerque, New Mexico. These include capturing and interpreting radio signals, emissions from the base itself, photographing a crashed vehicle on the Archuleta Mesa, New Mexico, photographing a secret military base on the Archuleta Mesa, New Mexico that was training commandos. In order to discredit, disrupt, and destroy Bennewitz and his efforts, Doty planted the idea in Bennewitz that he was really detecting alien activity. The following elements typically associated with organized stalking and electronic harassment indicate that Bennewitz was a targeted individual. Number one, the NSA set up surveillance in a house across the street from Bennewitz's house. Number two, the NSA stole Bennewitz's computers and substituted their own computer in order to monitor and sabotage all his communications, in order to steer his perceptions, to disrupt, deceive, and discredit and destroy him. This coincides with the 5 Ds of Britain's GCHQ: deny, deceive, disrupt, degrade, destroy. Greg Bishop, author of Project Beta, states from the point Bennewitz gave a presentation of his scientific findings to Air Force officials, the government decided from that point on that all his perceptions would be directed in the exact direction that the intelligence agencies wanted. Number three, and I'm going to go back and tell you the whole story. I wanted to do this first and go in reverse. Number three, Bennewitz reports hearing the voices of aliens. Were those voices technologically created and via microwave hearing, Frey effect, voice to skull synthetic telepathy phenomenon? Air Force Special Agent Richard Doty, Bennewitz's personal handler, admits to providing disinformation to Bennewitz and the wider UFO community in order to confuse and mislead him and make him look foolish. Number five, Bennewitz's homes was repeatedly broken into and sabotaged. Number six, Bennewitz was covertly with drugs. He believed the aliens did it. Under the influence of these drugs, Bennewitz drove into the desert. Was he actually subjected to military abduction, where the military attributes aliens in order to discredit subjects and victims? Intelligence supervisors in Washington, D.C. designated Bennewitz as a target and assigned him the role of the King of Spades in disruption operations. These unseen operators supervised Air Force Special Agent Richard Doty's counterintelligence operations in the Special Access Program. Number eight, Richard Doty turned William Moore, UFO researcher and co-author of the Roswell incident, into a government asset. Moore thereafter secretly reported on activities within the UFO community, participated in a series of break-ins of Bennewitz's home and the psychological warfare waged against Bennewitz. Moore was designated as the ace of spades in the operation. Nine, Air Force Special Agent Richard Doty admitted that he was an agent in the field that carried out orders from supervisors in D.C. to target designated citizens, UFO researchers, including Bennewitz, Moore, Valdez, and possibly Linda Moulton Howe. He used deception techniques in which he was specifically trained to confuse the UFO community in general and for specific individuals within the UFO community. He recruited UFO researcher author William Moore to spy on and discredit Bennewitz. Richard Doty said, I used those techniques against Bill Moore, and they worked as Bill Moore took me into his confidence. We had a professional relationship as far as him providing us information about the UFO community and agreeing to saying things we wanted to say regarding the UFO community or within the UFO community. Doty denied having anything to do with Project Serpo fraud. However, British Computer Network specialist Stephen Broadbent led a team of specialists that proved that Doty had sent fake emails to UFO researcher Victor Martinez regarding the Serpo deception. The perception influence spy technique is known as spoofing. Number 11, as part of the deception mission, Special Operation Forces flew helicopters near cattle mutilation sites on Archuleta Mesa near Dulce, New Mexico, in order to be misidentified as UFOs. Doty and fellow intel operatives staged props on Archula Mesa elsewhere designed to mislead Bennewitz. These counterintelligence deceptions resulted in Bennewitz passing on disinformation on a variety of related topics to the UFO community and the world. And we're part five is domestic groups that have been systematically targeted. I'm not going there right now. Right there, I'm going all the way to part one to tell you the story of what happened. This dude was all right, I'm gonna show you. I can tell you, I can read this better, and I can tell you. I'm I try to retain memory and redo and re-say things that I memorize and do it off memory, but it's kind of hard when your memory's messed up because of this stuff. Okay, so please be patient because this is a real documented case of a TI, documented in history, and I really think this is interesting. Okay, here's the story. Mirage Men. Okay, I'm gonna. Bennewitz in the late 70s and early Bennewitz became one of the several target individuals in the UFO community that returned into government assets, then destroyed via government counterintelligence, disinformation, perception management operations. Matter of fact, he was very smart, very intelligent, as will see, and he spent his last days locked up in a mental hospital and died in a mental hospital after they used him up as a disinfo agent. They beamed voices in his head, making him think he was communicating with aliens. They let him in. They sent communications because they knew he was trying to intercept communications from satellites, and they sent in communications with aliens talking. And he thought he was working trying to decipher them for the government. And the whole time, the government was the ones giving him the messages. All right, here it goes. Were the voices that aliens that Paul Bennewitz heard produced by microwave synthetic? I'm going right here. Upon studying the film, that's Mirage Men. There was a film about it. Okay, in 2018, let's see. I'll just read it all. Upon studying the film, I believe, and this is Mirage Men, directed by John Lundenberg, Roland Denton, and possibly at least one British, clandestinely targeted and destroyed Paul Bennewitz, an independent UFO researcher who investigations threatened to expose government black operations. In the late 70s, early 80s, Bennewitz became one of the several targeted individuals in the UFO community that were turned into government assets, then destroyed via government counterintelligence. Okay, I've done said that. Okay, so where the voices let's see. Upon studying the film, I believe it reveals a joint CISA. I'm gonna go. I'm sorry, I'm so scatterbrained. In 2018, Fade to Black radio program referred to beloved Richard Doty called in and admitted that he was 123 U.S. Air Force officers, strategic intelligence plainclothes officers that secretly infiltrated the UFO community. Each spy would covertly recruit and maintain four assets. Thus, in the 80s, when Doty was working on a single project, the Air Force would have had about 500 informants within the UFO community. Doty states Office of Intelligence Naval Intelligence of the Office of Naval Intelligence, FBI, much and probably USA Army also infiltrated the US UFO community to steer and mine the community for information. Doty also admits to being personal friends with former CIA Director Richard Helms, a primary figure in behind CIA MK Ultra ops who ordered the destruction of all CIA MK Ultra mind control documents in the mid 1970s. According to Doty, Helms, who was a personal friend of his and his father's, was the original Falcon in the Avery. Psychological warfare, torture techniques, the CIA Phoenix program, MH Chaos deployed in joint NSA USA Air Force operation against Bennewitz and others included labeling them as high value targets, as represented by playing cards, including the ace, king, jack, etc. This technique famously deployed against Saddam Hussein and members of his war were also used against American civilians. War protesters during the late 60s and early 70s in the CIA top secret, highly criminal MH Chaos domestic operations. See the below image of high value targets in the UFO community whose image adorns CIA face cards from Mirage Men. UFO research turned down for government asset Bill Moore was designated as Ace of Spades, as you can see. King, UFO researcher scientist turned Paul Bennewitz, was designed as the king of clubs. That's him. Journalist, author, cattle mutilation, UFO researcher turned government assets Linda Moulton Howe, designated as Queen of Hearts. Air Force counterintelligence special agent Richard C. Doty is the Jolly Joker in the Air Force. NSA M15 charade counterintelligence operation. And the hidden hand human manipulators conducting operations against targeted civilian enemies is designated with different playing cards. Are we on playing cards too? In addition to be a perception management op, this was and is a social religious engineering operation that's no doubt part of a larger social and religious engineering operations. More importantly, the film reveals the same psychological, information, cognitive warfare tactics and systems deployed against Cold War enemies have been and are being deployed against American civilian targets. These military intelligence, domestic counterintelligence, counterinsurgency operations, of course, have now expanded under the banner of counterterrorism. The film he's talking about is called Mirage Men. It's about Paul Bennewitz. Notably, the film lifts certain curtain of secrecy and exposes the hidden operational structures and personnel behind the target individual program. It demonstrates that the United States is controlled or steered by the military intelligence corporate complex. The cryptocracy are ruled by secrecy, that the goals and operational methods of the Mirage Men are completely anti-ethical to the interests and well-being of American people. The post-World War II U.S. government has gone rogue, totalitarian, much like the despotic dictatorships of the Soviet Union, China, East Germany, and Nazi Germany that genocided their own civilian population. Here's a summary of Mirage Men and quotes from the film. Number one, always believe what Richard Doty tells you about UFOs. That was a memo CIA Director Richard Helms signed, shown in Mirage Men. Number two, the general feeling among people who have devoted a big chunk to their life studying UFOs, I think, is fear that they have been taken for a ride, that these are hoaxes, but sophisticated hoaxes carried out by government. The main reason that we in UFO field recognize the name of Richard Doty is that Paul Bennewitz, a self-made man, a very successful businessman, was systematically driven insane, wound up in an insane asylum under treatment for a long time, lost his business, and was destroyed by the efforts of Richard Doty. U.S. Air Force Special Agent Richard Doty is a professional disinformer trained to lie. By looking at him, you're taking a glimpse into a whole machine that is now has a life of its own. That was Bob Durant, former airline pilot and UFO researcher. Number three, we in the intelligence community planted the seed in Paul that was he was analyzing was probably UFOs. Back in the 80s, it was my job to confuse the UFO community. There's probably about 80% of false information being presented and about 20% factual information. Unfortunately, the UFO community does not know which is which. It's all government projects, is my belief. I wasn't in a position to write to the operational plan. This comes from supervisor headquarters in Washington, the intelligence community, and they decide how they're going to conduct these operations, how they're going to target people. And I'm the agent in the field doing this. Paul Bennewitz had a small portable microwave antenna on his roof, and he told me he could hear aliens talking. Was that V2K synthetic telepathy? Probably so, because they admitted they pumped communications in his head. Richard Doty um, said that. Yeah, that was his handler. Number four, admitted handler. Number four, from the point Bennewitz gave a presentation of his scientific findings to the Air Force officials, the government decided from that point on all his perceptions would be directed in the exact direction that the intelligence agencies wanted, which means they've convinced him he was talking to aliens and he was working, now he was helping the government transmit or, what do you call them, interpret signals and interpret languages from aliens, and he was hearing all this communication when really they were giving him the communication and they had made all this stuff up and created a false reality for Mr. Bennewitz, unfortunately. Bennewitz said he saw people coming in and out of the house looking away from the curtains. As it turns out, NSA had people in his house. They were watching him and were beaming messages from across the street into his antenna setup. He started picking up these signals, and the NSA was scared that anybody could figure that out. They decided just to take complete control of what he was seeing and gave him exactly what he thought he should be getting. They replaced his computer with their own computer. The computer had software that would decode the messages he was getting in any way they wanted him to see them. If you look at the transcripts of what he got, the aliens said they were from a planet with no water. They were trying to find a new place to live and wanted to take over Earth, and they could only trust Paul. These would have some kind of agreement with him. And Paul said, "You can't trust these aliens. These aliens are evil." This served to make him look silly, which was exactly what they were trying to do. And that's from Greg Bishop, author of Project Beta, the Bennewitz story. Related? Question mark. The Swedish military, FOI, and presumably CIA, DOD, declares in their report of activities that their goal is to direct the cognitive functions of people for a lifetime. From Key Insights to Global Stalking, Organized Stalking Mind Control from Ronnie Keel, book Bright Light on Black Shadows, and I will read that book coming up after I get done with Project Soulcatcher. If we examine the U.S.-based mythos of the alien crashes, Roswell story, human abductees, we find the stories of the early abductees such as George Adamski and Betty and Barney Hill fall apart. In fact, they are stories that were already written in science fiction, stories that were already out. Obviously, this was all made-up nonsense. For example, the George Adamski story was actually fostered and protected by none other than Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA. Why would the head of the CIA threaten to sue anyone who tried to question or debunk the George Adamski story? A new mythos is being advanced to replace traditional religions such as Christianity. J. Dyer, Red Alert, UFO Deception. Plot rolling out December 13, 2024. Number seven, the entire story of a secret treaty between U.S. governments and aliens, of exchanges of technology between us and aliens, and the battles between aliens and American armed forces, and of aliens having implanted hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of human beings for the purpose of taking over the world and using us as cattle or slaves, came about as a result of a disinformation process. Bill Moore, UFO researcher, U.S. Air Force asset, author of the Roswell incident. Number eight, 1952, CIA, faced with a huge public interest in flying saucers, brought together a panel of senior scientists, the Robertson panel. They concluded there was nothing to these flying saucer reports as objective devices of some kind, but nevertheless the government had to exercise great care to debunk these stories that individual citizens that express an interest in flying saucers ought to be carefully watched. I believe this to be the founding document that has been the long-range strategy that has been followed by the U.S. government. Bob Durant, former airline pilot and researcher, UFO research. 9. Bennewitz was filming a really highly strange craft. The counterintelligence job is to come in and muddy the waters and make him look like a fool. It's been a cover story in the U.S. for a long time. Tell the media, tell anybody who will listen they're using UFOs to cover up advanced technology, when the truth is exactly the opposite of the words. Doty and others would probably defend their counterintelligence efforts as being patriotic. They're carrying out work assigned by people who have decided there must be a policy of denial in the interest of national security. They're working for my government. They're working in agencies of the government that's supposed to be protecting of the people by people, for the people. How did it all turn upside down? A fractured hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor that nobody knows exactly what the truths are, and everybody has found themselves completely suspicious of the motives of any human being because counterintelligence in England and the U.S. and a lot of other countries have worked overtime to misinform and tell the public and the media there's nothing to the UFO phenomenon. What is it? What is it that considered so threatened that they would kill people to keep it silent? Linda Moulton Howe, journalist, a filmmaker, a strange harvest cattle mutation. Number 3, a part dialogue from Mirage Men. Here's Bob Durant, former airline pilot. In 1952, CIA faced with huge and flying saucers brought together a panel of scientists. They concluded there was nothing to these flying saucers as objective devices, but nevertheless, they had to exercise great care to debunk these stories. I believe this to be founding, expressed an interest in flying ought to be carefully watched. I believe this to be founding document that has been long range strategy been found. Ain't that scary? That's what we're living in. In this manner, the flying saucer phenomenon was established as a psychological operation against the public, and particular surveillance targeting was to be applied to activists in this area. Please note, in 52, the CIA was also conducting artichoke and bluebird mind control operations with the express goal of controlling people's behavior. A CIA memo associated with Operation Bluebird stated, the aim is to control an individual to the point where he'll do our bidding against his will and even against such fundamental laws of human nature such as self-preservation, which is what these gang stalking handlers and all that do. Bob Durant, the general feeling amongst people who have devoted a big chunk of their life studying UFOs. I think it is fear been taken for a ride. These are hoaxes, but sophisticated hoaxes carried out by their own government. Let's take one step at a time. You're looking at U.S. Air Force counterintelligence officer Richard Doty, the professional disinformer trained to lie. Richard Doty said back in the 80s it was my job to confuse the UFO community. 80% of false information was presented, 20% factual. Unfortunately, the community does not know which. Bob Durant said Doty had this wonderful way to sell it. I'm with the government. You cooperate with us, I'm going to tell you what the government really knows about UFOs. The main reason we in the UFO field recognize the name of Richard Doty is that Paul Bennewitz, a self-made, very successful man, engineer and president of Thunder Scientific Corporation in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was systematically driven insane, wound up in an insane asylum under treatment for a long time, lost his business, had to turn it to his family, and was destroyed by the efforts of Doty. Walter Bolesley, a former U.S. Air Force Special Investigation, you hear about the ones where something goes wrong, the failures. It was unfortunate what happened to Mr. Bennewitz, but they were supposed to protect something and they did their job. Richard Doty said this, I began a dialogue with Paul trying to find out everything he had. This was Paul's handler. Bennewitz had sophisticated scientific equipment and was collecting EMF frequency emissions coming from Kirkland Air Force Base, and he was filming an object that was part of an experiment classified project of the government that sent up a flag. We had to decide what we would do then. Would we allow this to happen or would we try to convince him otherwise? We planted the idea in Paul that maybe he was hearing and picking up on his equipment was maybe from UFOs. Here's the webmaster's comment. The nature and purpose of the radio frequency emissions coming from Kirkland Air Force Base is not clarified. In my speculation, they may have been running mind control experiments on the population. Bob Durant, Doty was feeding this man Bennewitz all kinds of lies about UFO aliens to be kept underneath a mountain nearby. Bennewitz was believing it all. Greg Bishop was the author of Project Beta's story of Bennewitz, national security, and the creation. Here's Richard Doty, the handler. Paul asked the Air Force for a grant to investigate UFOs at the base and a grant to continue the contact he claimed he had some of these aliens. At one point, another agency, the NSA, was conducting an investigation. They set up a surveillance team across the street from Paul's residence. And Paul's son contacted me and said, leave my father alone. You guys are across the street and you're bothering my father. He's getting paranoid. Well, I knew it wasn't us. Greg Bishop. He said he saw people coming in and out of the house looking from curtains. As it turns out, they had people in the house. They were watching him and were beaming messages from across the street. He started picking up these signals, and the NSA was scared that anybody could figure that out. They decided to just take complete control of what he was seeing and give him exactly what he thought he should be getting. They were places, well, I done said that. If you look at the transcripts of what he got, I done said that too. Greg Bishop on Archula Mesa. It was very remote there. Supposedly it's the site of an underground alien base. That rumor got started in the 80s because of what was told to Bennewitz by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Doty. Paul thought this was Richard's handler again. Paul thought the aliens had to be coming from some other place. Paul was the pilot and he flew up to Archula Mesa near Dulce, New Mexico to see if the saucers and aliens were coming from that area. He filmed things up there again, presented a problem for us because he was actually filming a secretive military installation that was training commandos. So then we had to convince Paul that what he was seeing up there was again UFOs. I'm gonna tell you a story. In '92, my dad came running in from the house and said, "Get the camera, get the camera. There's a big ball of light above the pond, shining a light in the pond." So by the time we all got out there, I was about 12 years old at the time. By the time we all got out there, there was a ball of light above the pond, but it wasn't shooting a light in the pond anymore. It stood there for about 12 and 15 minutes. My stepmom had it on VHS, and I asked my brother about it the other day, and he said he couldn't find it nowhere. But anyway, this ball of light hovered above the pond. When we went out there, it wasn't shining a light, but my dad swore it was. Um, and then the light just disappears. I mean, it starts fading up slow and then it just disappears. I really think it was a drone being tested back in the 90s. I don't think it was, but my dad was so scared. And I see why because of this stuff. He said, "Do not talk about this at school. Don't talk about it to nobody." And we was kids at the time when that happened. Okay, Richard Doty. Paul thought aliens had been okay. Greg Bishop, the Air Force had been put Bennewitz in a helicopter with Richard Doty the first time and flew him up to a space above Dulce called Archula Mesa. And before they took him there, they dumped a bunch of props there. And they said, "You're right, Paul, there's stuff up here. There's evidence of what's going on. Why don't you check it out?" Can you imagine uh, the disinformation that targeted individuals may have and the rabbit holes that we may be going down? Um, regarding this. You know, if you know they're feeding these people in the UFO community fake lies, what are they feeding us? Richard Doty, I went up to Mesa with Paul and we camped together a few nights. We saw strange lights coming out of the ground in a pulse manner that looked like they were saucers flying out of the mountains. I actually saw this. I was somewhat concerned that maybe Paul had stumbled onto something. Ron Regert, retired aerospace engineer, Voyager program. Paul was flying what he called his missions up around Archula Mesa. He was sending fascinating letters, 5 to 8 pages long, handwritten with pencil sketches of what he had seen. Finally, he started sending large format 8 by 10 photos he took with Hasselblad. And he said, "Here's the black atomic powered ship that crashed last week." And he circled it. And bless his heart, I couldn't see anything. They they fixed the props when he went over. Greg Bishop. Something actually did crash near Dulce in the late 1980s. Bennewitz just happened to be flying over and took some high quality pictures of it. And so the disinformation campaign had to be ratcheted up even more. The Air Force knew it was something they were testing in this area and that had gone off course and crashed. Of course, Doty and Air Force agents told Bennewitz it was some sort of alien craft that had been given to the humans to use and they'd shot it out of the sky, some sort of lesson. Greg Bishop. Agents would break into his house to see what he had. At one point, he had these pictures of whatever crashed. Agents were very interested in getting these pictures, so they did. What probably crashed was some sort of unmanned aerial vehicle. Now they are over in the Middle East, remote control, killing people in cars, and they drive across the desert. In 1985, they didn't want anybody to have any knowledge of this kind of thing. They took great pains to explain to him that it's atomic-powered aircraft that the aliens had helped us with to bring down that laughter curtain again so people wouldn't pay attention. They'd think it was another UFO nut. Gabe Valdez, Highways Patrol, Dulce, New Mexico. Somebody gave him a satellite picture of a landing area. In 1983, he went up there with me and Chief Police Apache Tribe, and they had made a landing pad, and he took us right to the spot. They were giving him this disinformation. Some of it was true and some of it wasn't. I think that was the biggest problem he had coping with why this and why not the other. Greg Bishop. He thought this was the place the aliens were gathering to take over the world. He wanted to trap them all, kill them all in one fell swoop, and save the earth. By the mid 1980s, I'm sorry, a target individual in the 70s, not 80, 60s. I'm sorry. He had written to these congressmen, even President Reagan, saying this was going on. The Air Force is cooperating with me. And he'd get answers back saying, we're not interested in this story. They were talking about some sort of cognitive dissonance he got. Nobody seemed to care about what he was talking about except the Air Force. Bob Durant. So many people knew about Paul Bennewitz and that sad, strange, horrible story that it got way out of realm of just a cute flying saucer story. Or Greg Bishop again. By 1988, things were so bad his family decided to take him to a psychiatric facility to see if they could try to save his life. He said aliens would come in at night through his wall and put something in him that would make him get in his car and drive out into the desert. And he didn't remember what he was doing or why he went. The scary thing was there was actually no marks on his arm. This suggests he was drugged or abducted, probably by counterintelligence agents and their cohorts. Richard Helms, CIA director. Memo shown on screen signed by CIA director. Always believe what Richard Doty tells you about UFOs. Gabe Valdez says Bennewitz was caught right in the middle of it, and he was used. If it wasn't for Paul Bennewitz, I would have never known 70% of the stuff that was going on. I saw an entrance to an underground base. Well, the first case of cattle mutilation in Dulce, New Mexico was 1974, June 14th. People do kill animals and steal the meat, but this is different. Why did they just take the udder and lymph nodes and the tongue at the base of the throat? We were finding the evidence of mutilations, gas masks that were made by the military, radar shafts, and tranquilizers that were in them. Atropine, they were putting atropine in them. I would talk to the ranchers. They were losing cattle and nobody was compensating them. I wasn't hiding anything. I never did. Linda Moulton Howe, journalist of Making a Strange Harvest. I'm established as somebody who's doing all this in news and documentaries. So I started getting newspaper. People are saying, Linda, what is the answer? I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go get to the bottom of this animal mutilation mystery. And finally, in October 1979, who is the head of the district attorney's office in Trinidad, New Mexico, says Lou Geroro, says with our cameras running finally, investigators, I have come to the conclusion we're dealing with creatures not from this planet, is the way he put it, which is in my film, A Strange Harvest, and said all the reasons why. The orange lights that he and deputies seen go into the ground come out split in two. Gabe Valdez said we did follow one, and it took turns hovering over cattle. Gomez's cattle. It flew over me. I was going to try to intercept it, but looked like a saucer type aircraft. But you could see blinking lights. Why do they put lights on them if they're from outer space? They don't need any guidance with lights. Dr. Christopher Green, former CIA scientist, says I was an analyst in the agency responsible for chemical weapons analysis. So embassy would always give me special security forces and bodyguards. A special forces guy came in and said, "Hey, what do you know about these crazies about these helicopters and mutilated cattle?" He said, "I'm in a special group in New Mexico. We've been doing something that's really, really interesting. We got these helicopters I'm flying that are all fixed up. First, they got no markings on them. Second, they're really fast. Third, they're really quiet. We got red lights. We got strobe lights." He said, we pretend we're UFOs. Mark Pilkington, author of Mirage Men. Project Gas Buggy was an underground nuclear detonation that took place in 1967 in Dulce, New Mexico. It was an attempt to release natural gas reserves from subterranean environment in an early version of what we know recognized as fracking. Some people suggested the cattle mutilation program was actually a covert monitoring program for assessing the radiation leakage levels into the environment and into the ecosystem and the food chain. Gabe Valdez, Highway Patrol, Dulce, New Mexico, or Dulce, New Mexico. Senator Harris Smith had a conference in 1980 because the ranchers were asking for help. I met Bennewitz there. He was taking a bunch of pictures of the aircraft coming out of Kirkland Air Force Base. We were watching the same aircraft fall into the Dulce area. Everyone's looking at sophisticated aircraft and they're saying, well, they're the ones who are mutilating the cattle. One agency was doing cattle mutilations, but the people who were doing the research on the aircraft used the mutilations to test the aircraft so that people would think it was a UFO and help the cattle mutilation thing. It's a wonder they didn't crash into each other. Walter Bosley, a former special agent, U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations, would we use perception to help shroud what we were trying to protect? Absolutely. If you got an aerial platform that's highly advanced in the public who happens to get a glimpse from it time to time, if they're convinced that it's from Venus, there's no way it could be our military. That's awesome. If I'm the agent running the protection for that particular program that's helping me protect the program for years, I might even feed the fire. Here's Linda Howe again. Air Force Doty and others would probably defend their counterintelligence efforts as being patriotic. They're carrying out work assigned by people who decide there must be a policy of denial and interest in national security. They're working for my government. They're working in agencies of the government that are supposed to be protecting of the people, by the people, for the people. How did it turn upside down? Unidentified voice at the core. There's something they want to keep people away from. A real truth. Greg Bishop said disinformation is designed to appeal to the person that's operating on. The more dramatic you can be appealing to that prejudice, the better you can get your hooks into the person you're trying to get. In Paul Bennewitz's case, he was talking about UFOs, and so if the Air Force wanted his full and undivided attention, they would talk UFOs with him, which is exactly what they did. Bennewitz was filming a really high-strange craft. The counter intel's job is to come in and muddy the waters, make him look like a fool. It's been a cover story in the U.S. for a long time. Tell the media, anybody who listens, they're using UFOs to cover up advanced technology, when the truth is exactly the opposite of the words. I'm only going to read a couple more of these, and then I'm going to go down to the last of it about the different groups of people that are targeted. Richard Dolan, UFO historian, it became seen as necessary to create an active disinformation program in the late 70s and 80s. And the reason was the American Freedom of Information Act. Thousands of pages of documents released from the CIA, FBI, all the military agencies proved that these agencies were interested in and were tracking the UFO phenomenon during the late 70s. A variety of leaks occurred. Researchers at the time were hopeful that it got the right leak, the right document, it might be able to smash the wall of secrecy. Then we get agencies entering the fray and leaking documents of dubious origin that caused now 25 years worth of dissension in the UFO field, and the mainstream media moved the UFO topic to the realm of entertainment. So the movies are used to inoculate public against these truths. So the demonstrably false UFO stories become inoculations. One of the keys to a disinformation campaign is to have a feedback loop, and you need people on the inside to feed back to you the results of the operation. Bob Durant, or here's his handler one more time. I was given the task of making contact with Moore and finding out what he knew and who he knew. Bill was reluctant to close everything to me for obvious reasons. Here I am, a government agent, introducing myself, wanting to know what he knew. But there are techniques we were trained to use in gaining that person's confidence. I used those techniques against Bill Moore, and they worked. And Bill Moore took me into his confidence, and we had a professional relationship as far as him providing us information about the UFO community, agreeing to say things that we wanted to say regarding the UFO community or within the UFO community. I'm going to just skip to Richard Doty, the handler's things. There wasn't a whole lot that we did. Really, really. It was just a simple nod and statement to Paul that what he was seeing was probably UFOs. And Mark Pilkington said, a generally assumed counterintelligence operation conducted against Bennewitz was designed to throw him off scent of some kind of experiment classified technology he was accidentally filming over the Air Force Base. But when you stop and think about it, this doesn't make much sense. If the Kirkland-based personnel wanted him to stop the investigation, they could have ordered him to do so. And instead, they encouraged him to continue his research and facilitated his growing delusions about an extraterrestrial invasion. What this suggests is rather than a campaign directed against Bennewitz, this was an information war on the UFO community. There are a number of reasons why Air Force intelligence might have wanted to use Bennewitz as a conduit for disinformation. The community was constantly seeking evidence for extraterrestrial conspiracy and cover-up. They were digging through documents, hanging out mid-secret air bases, quite like stumbling upon general military secrets, and more serious possible that Soviet intelligence agents may have been infiltrating the UFO field in order to extract information about new technologies. I think it's no coincidence the time of this operation coincided with the development of the stealth bomber, and that's exactly the kind of information the Soviet agents would be looking for. And I'm going to pause my recording for a minute. Hold on. Okay. Sorry, I had to make a important phone call real quick. Okay, I was selected to participate in a special access program with counterintelligence community. My supervisor said you were going to, this is his handler, Richard Doty. Paul Bennewitz, you're going to be briefed into a program. You're going to be responsible for investigating everything associated with this program. The first part of the briefing dealt with how the U.S. Air Force were countering unauthorized disclosed technology to the public by using UFO phenomenon as a cover. Second part of the briefing was where we were actually shown and briefed about U.S. government's involvement with extraterrestrials since the 40s, which is obviously the most interesting part of the briefing. They showed us a film, which was a late 40s or 50s film of a recovery operation they said was in Roswell. They showed crash debris, extraterrestrial bodies, and there was also a briefing showing a live alien sitting in a room talking to people. And the narrator of this film talked about the continuation of a connection between the government and extraterrestrial civilization. After viewing this, I was not sure if it was real or perhaps some kind of psychological conditioning. I don't think I initially believed any of it, but after a film, the colonel started talking about how the U.S. government, and it was always the U.S. government, it wasn't the Air Force, it was the government, how they had progressed from the debris recovery phase in the late 40s to now the late 70s. The more he spoke, the more I realized that what I saw was real. And that's what Doty said. Lyndon Milton House said a fractured hall of mirrors with quicksand floor. Nobody knows exactly what truths are. Everybody has found themselves completely suspicious of motives of any human being because counterintelligence in England and the United States and a lot of other countries worked overtime to misinform and tell the public and the media there's nothing to the UFO phenomenon. That's a lie. I have no question about it. And my work is trying to shed light on what could be so threatening about some other intelligence. But it was a black project. A government black project is all it was. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to go on down. Let me see. Yeah, I'm going down to this and then I'm going to end the video. Domestic groups that have been systematically targeted by U.S. intel community, aka targeted groups. Communist Party infiltrated by FBI. Black Panthers, as you know, if you go down, you can see my video about Tupac, his family being targeted because they were Black Panthers. Civil rights groups, civil rights workers, anti-Vietnam protesters. CIA MH Chaos had at least 300,000 student protesters tracked and targeted by the CIA and DOD in the late 60s, early 70s. Number five, rock and roll scene in the 70s and 60s with rock stars as mind control, multiple personality MK Ultra puppets. Number six, the hippie culture, counterculture created by CIA in the late 60s, early 70s. Number seven, feminist groups. Number eight, UFO community created by the CIA. Media, CIA's Operation Mockingbird. Number 10, new religious movements to accomplish religious engineering, including Operation Crestone Baca. Number 11, other New Age cults, Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians, Family of God, Operation Crest. I'm convinced if you look at the Branch Davidian story, David Koresh, he had this, he either wrecked or was driving across railroad tracks in a truck, and seen this vision or a hologram of Jesus or heard Jesus, one of them. Anyway, that was manufactured to see how far he would take it once he had that encounter. That encounter was manufactured by the CIA, and you see where it went, and that's why they destroyed it all and destroyed everybody as a part of it because it was a test. Okay, groups opposing nuclear war, including Beyond War in 1980s, were targeted. Animal rights groups, environmental groups, indeed the environmental movement, individual groups involved in giving sanctuary to Latin American refugees and torture victims, the 9/11 Truth Movement, climate science community, medical establishment, Navy, CIA, DoD projects, Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Ultra, 1940s, psychological, psychiatric, neuroscience profession, Project Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Ultra, mind control programs from the 1940s onward. So psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience profession was targeted. Number 20, domestic terrorist stalking groups organized and maintained by public-private partnerships. Number 21, Occupy Wall Street movement. Number 22, the TIA target individual community. Of course, how many times I've heard other TIs say to me, thank you for all you do for the TI community. How can you have a community of people being terrorized, tortured, or slow killed by the government? A community of prisoners and human lab rats? Question mark. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. I hope this shows you that people do get targeted. This is a very good case of proof of a man that was targeted. Paul Bennewitz, I have not watched Mirage Men yet, but I plan to watch it one day. But yeah, so there's more of this stuff too, and I'll put the link in the thing in the description to where I found this at. But yeah, Paul Bennewitz, people who doubt that ordinary people get targeted and driven crazy and gaslit and stuff, all they got to do is look up Paul Bennewitz. He was an ordinary man, and they destroyed his life. Anyway, God bless all TIs. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, and I'm going to stop recording.